Hello there. So I'm Paula Gardner, the founder of Redundancy Recovery Hub, and I'm here today with a tutorial around the subject of possible selves. So the psychological theory of possible selves was coined by two psychologists, Marcus and Nereus, and it's one of my favourite psychological theories, and I think it's invaluable when it comes to thinking about changing career or changing path, changing direction. So the idea around possible selves is that we have multiple possible selves. So I am Paula the psychologist, but in my previous life I was Paula the PR. I could be Paula the train driver, Paula the engineer, Paula the florist, Paula the hairdresser if I wanted to. Some of those possible selves are only ever going to be in my imagination. I don't think I'm ever going to be an engineer or an astronaut or a train driver. But it's quite possible that I could be a florist or a hairdresser if I so desired and decided to retrain as one. So the idea is that there are many, many possible selves out there, and the only limit to our possible selves is our imagination. If we can imagine it, then that is a possible self for us. So thing is, with career change, we don't wake up one morning and say, darn it, I am fed up of what I'm doing now. I am going to retrain and become a lecturer in mathematics, and then go step by step and become a lecturer in mathematics. Career change is much, much messier than that, even if you have the time to sit back and think about what it is that you actually want to do next. Let's take myself for an example. So I started in PR in my very early 20s and started my own agency and ran that agency for 20 years. Towards the end of that time, I started to get a little bit bored. So what I did was explore a multitude of possible selves. Not that I knew I was doing it at that time. One of the first possible selves I explored was becoming a meditation teacher. I enjoyed it, but decided that it was a lot of work and not quite enough money for me to live on. Another possible self that I explored was a hypnotherapist. I actually qualified as a hypnotherapist. Another possible self that I explored was becoming a therapist. I went on a taster evening to become a therapist. And another possible self I explored was going back to university. I talked to a few people, chatted to some lecturers about doing a master's in business psychology. And that's what I did. I went back to university and got my master's in business psychology at the University of East London. And it was only by doing that master's that I found out about career psychology. I didn't know there was a branch of psychology completely centered around careers. So it was very unlikely that I was going to wake up and think, right, I'm going to become a career psychologist. What I had to do was to go through those alternative options, decide they weren't for me, even go down the route of a master's. And it was only then that I came across this career psychologist. And it was only after a certain amount of time that I started to call myself a career psychologist. A lot of career change is wrapped up in our identity and how we describe ourselves. So for quite a while, I was describing myself as ex-PR turned psychologist. It was as though I couldn't let go of my old identity. And it took a little bit of time. It took 2 years for me to really step into being able to say, I am a business and career psychologist. There's a really interesting book called Working Identity by an author called Herminia Ibarra. And the whole book is about career change with the theory of possible selves. And if you are interested in this topic, I do urge you to get the book. And there's one thing that Herminia says which caught my eye, and that is we cannot simply trade in the old for a new working identity or upgrade to version 2.0 to reinvent ourselves. We must live through a period of transition in which we rethink and reconfigure a multitude of possibilities. It is nearly impossible to think out how to reinvent ourselves, and therefore it is equally hard to execute in a planned and orderly way. A successful outcome hinges less on knowing one's inner true self at the start than starting on a multi-step process of envisaging and testing possible futures. So that means that even though you can do lots of exercises, and we have plenty of them here on the site, what really is going to make a difference is actually go out there and test out your possible selves. So what does that mean in reality? So the way that you can test out your future possible selves ways are, one, think about taking courses. These can be short online courses, or even going back to uni or retraining. It can be talking to people doing those jobs, in those careers. Sometimes even just having a conversation with somebody about one of your possible selves can help you decide whether it's the right route for you or the wrong route for you. Other options are work experience, shadowing somebody, even just reading about the qualifications that you need to become an accountant may help you decide if, yes, I want to become an accountant, or no, I don't fancy doing all those years of study and exams. Don't look upon it as a failure if you try something and it doesn't work, because all this is feedback. It's telling you that that possible self isn't quite right for you. Maybe it's not right for you full stop, or maybe it's not right for you right now. But it's all feedback, and the more you can cross off possible selves, then the more likely it is that the selves that you are left with are the ones that are going to be right for you. Finally, we have another possible self. We have a negative possible self. So our negative possible selves are the selves that got made redundant and then went back to doing a job in exactly the same thing because it was safe and easy to do so, even though we've previously been dreaming about changing careers for the last 5 years. Our negative possible selves are the selves that get stuck, that wallow in the grief of being made redundant and don't move forward. So our possible selves are warnings. So while we must bear our possible selves, our warning negative possible selves in mind, the most advantaged things to do is to work towards all the exciting possible selves out there for you. So takeaways from possible selves. How can you use the theory to help you work out what your next step is? So my suggestions are just have an afternoon playing around with your own possible selves. I'm sure there are some possible selves in your head already. I know for many years I had the idea of Paula the psychologist in my head, and it wasn't until somebody actually said, "Oh, why don't you do it?" that I'd actually seriously considered it. So think about the possible selves that you have perhaps been daydreaming about and pop them all down on a piece of paper. Keep going, because quite often it's when we get to the end of that list that we start finding the ones that really resonate with us. Go through that list, work out which ones are practical, which ones perhaps involve too much study, would involve you moving to Australia or out to the countryside to be able to put into practice, that might not be right quite now, or quite right now rather. And then just take one or two of them and look at some ways that you can explore them. What could you do right now, this week, over the next month to explore if these are the right ones for you? There's no pressure on this, in that don't feel you have to decide by the end of this afternoon what your next step is going to be. Quite often these things are revealed to us through conversations with other people. And that's the last thing that I wanted to say, is that this isn't about announcing to the world that you want to do this, you want to become a florist, you want to go back to university. This is you exploring, and it's nobody else's business really. So explore at your leisure, keep what you're doing to yourself so you don't have that added pressure of, oh, if I try this and I fail at it, then everyone's going to know. Just try it, just explore and have fun with the concept. I think Possible Selves is quite a person-friendly theory, and we can learn a lot about ourselves, even through things that we try and fail at or decide that aren't right for us. So have fun exploring what your possible self might be, and do consider buying Work and Identity by Herminia Ibarra. There'll be a link underneath this video if you are interested in reading more. Thank you.